Okay, I have it on my computer, yeah. It's just in case.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. It looks like you saw plenty of pizza, so we won't be offended if you go take seconds during this time. Yeah, but thank you so much for being here. So this is the last event that we have at IIS this semester, and it's our grand finale with an incredible panel. It's also the last of our 4-part speaker series called Rupture, the US and the Fate of World Order, where we're looking in real time at the disruptions happening in US foreign policy. So we've had events on democracy and human rights, security, trade, and now multilateralism as a whole, kind of tying all that together. So I'll just introduce our speakers and our moderator. So Philip Yoon is an IIS senior fellow, for which we are very grateful. And his career spans over 4 decades across security affairs, including nuclear policy, I was just learning about, foreign policy, diplomacy, law, and international development, including service as presidential appointee at the Department of State, where he was a senior advisor on East Asian and Pacific affairs and worked on US policy and negotiations with North Korea under President Clinton. He is currently the co-president and co-CEO of the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California, which is the nation's oldest public affairs forum. And like I said, he's an IIS senior fellow, and we're really glad to have him here this semester. Steve Vogel is the Ilhan New Professor of Asian Studies and Director of the Political Economy program here at Cal, where he specializes in industrial policy, comparative political economy, and Japanese politics. Is that right? Okay, got it. His most recent book is called Marketcraft: How Governments Make Markets Work. And he argues that markets are not spontaneous, but actively shaped by governments. This is a framework with broad implications for how we and scholars understand state power and economic governance. And finally, Amy Hawthorne is a Middle East expert and has extensive experience across governments, think tanks, and NGOs, including as also a State Department appointee during the Arab Spring, where she helped coordinate US support for Egypt's democratic transition. Her work focuses on US foreign policy, authoritarian governance, and the struggle for democracy across the Middle East and North Africa. And her writing has appeared in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and Working Institutions publications. So as you have heard, this is an incredibly esteemed and accomplished panel that can give us that overview of multilateralism as a whole. And then our moderator is IIS faculty co-director Susan Hyde, who is a political scientist here at Cal, who you may have seen before. So I will let Susan take it away.
Great, not my first time in this chair. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you here for our 4th panel on the US and the fate of world order, focused today on multilateralism. This has been a series that we have had this semester focused on. This is our 4th one, as we've said, but the first 3 were on rupture in the field of democracy and human rights. And then we did one on international security, and then we did one on economic order. And this one is really bringing all of those things together in some sense. And it's fitting because it's the last week of the semester. I just taught my last class, ran over here from that. So we're excited to have you all here. The question that we wanted to start with is a question for all of our panelists. So we'll just have folks respond in order. As many of you in the room know, the US has cut funding for the UN and withdrawn or disengaged from over 60 international institutions and initiatives since this current administration took office in January 2025. I often teach, I do teach international relations. I teach intro to international relations. And one of the things we used to teach is that for most governments, even between political parties, foreign policy doesn't change that much. It's a lot more consistent than campaigns would have you think. And from administration to administration, even in transitions for political parties around the world, not just the United States, typically it's fairly stable. This series is around rupture, right? Because there's been big changes in foreign policy, and that's what we're trying to understand. The current rupture is much deeper than the first Trump administration. a core tenet of the international order has really been upended in at least the post-World War II international order, that multilateral cooperation can be mutually beneficial to most states. And geopolitics need to not always be a zero-sum game. We're here today to talk about how resilient the international community might turn out to be, especially if the rest of the world doubles down to try to reaffirm multilateral commitments, or at least some other countries in the world try to respond by re-emphasizing international cooperation. This is one option. Another option is that we need to accept that we are past the point of no return, at least in terms of US leadership as exercised for 8 decades, beginning at the end of World War II. So this is a very broad set of questions. Basically, is it all over? We're going into completely uncharted territory, or remaking international order as we understand it, or is there some chance that the rest of the world will react in a way that preserves some of what we have had before? So with that, does anyone want to start? Amy, do you want to start? Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Susan, and the Institute so much for inviting me. I just moved back to my hometown of Berkeley after many, many decades in Washington, D.C. So this is my first time to speak to a local audience. And thank you
And
for being that audience.
Cal.
No, I'm not, but
Oh,
many people. in my family
that's
are.
it. Sorry. You know your way
I
around.
wish I wasn't Cal.
Yeah.
So just to start us off a little provocatively, my feeling right now is that the rupture is permanent, in the sense that the US-led rules-based liberal international order, of course I'm putting those phrases in quotes, is ending. It hasn't completely ended, but its end is accelerating in the past year under the Trump administration. This change has been, or the challenges to this order have obviously, as we all know, been underway for many years. This is not something that started with Trump, and I'm sure my fellow panelists can speak more about that. There's broad global trends with the rise of China and other powers, the relative decrease in US, influence, if not power, relative decrease in US influence, changes domestically in the United States that have been building for a long time. There's a lot of factors that have set this change in motion for a while. And one could look perhaps at the Biden administration as kind of the last effort to hold it together before things really started to shift. But as Susan mentioned in her remarks, the shift and the rupture under the Trump administration has been very deep, very significant, and very fast. So in my view, it is going to, I don't think the old order is coming back, but we're just, I don't know if we're at the beginning, we're somewhere early on in a very complex process of global transition to new orders, new systems. I can't predict where we're going to end up. And this shift may be unfolding, for decades, or at least for another decade, till we have a sense of where we're moving towards. But that's my sense, is that it's over.
Steve, you want to go next?
Sure. So I would say the era of globalization, as defined by, trade liberalization and liberalization of financial flows, that era is over. I would also say that kind of US hegemony in terms of like international institutions really being founded on the power of the United States, that is over. I think that leaves open the possibility of a kind of a US-led multilateralism, where the US still plays a leadership role, but not quite as hegemonic as in the past. I'm not sure I'm going to give you a percentage chance on that, but I think that the kind of the hints, as Amy suggested, would be to look at the interaction between Trump 1 and Biden, right? So you had kind of like the partial destruction of the international order, and then the partial reassembly of that international order, both in terms of our alliances and also in terms of international institutions. So now with Trump 2, with a much bigger disruption, what are the chances that you could put that pass together? And I guess I would say not zero, but it really is going to hinge on the next leader or like leaders of the United States would have to have a pretty strong commitment to this being a priority, which is, like I said, a possibility, but probably not the highest possibility. Just to kind of think about why that may or may not happen. I think one of the biggest reasons why it may not happen is it's just not going to be the biggest priority for a post-Trump administration. I mean, I think the priority is going to be put our own house back together before we try to save the world's problems. I'm not saying that should be the priority. I'm just saying that that could displace an agenda where you would have the youth really taking a leading role in trying to think about how to revamp international institutions. On the slightly positive side, I would say that Trump 2 is looking like it's going to be so bad that it creates an, crisis creates opportunity. And fortunately or unfortunately, probably unfortunately, the fate of the world hinges partly on American domestic politics, right? And so if there is a big course correction in U.S. domestic policy, that increases the possibilities of positive change on the international front. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that there's a total disintegration, and I think this is where this conversation is probably going to go in terms of the many possibilities, but would be kind of a more ad hoc multilateralism where you would have different configurations on different issues. You'd have like shifting coalitions. I mean, it's striking now to kind of look back at the post-war era and think about how kind of coherent it was in terms of, the Bretton Woods system and US-based institutions. It's probably going to be a lot messier than that, but that doesn't mean totally disorderly. It's just going to be more like a patchwork than a regime.
Yeah, so one of the phrases that has come to mind lately is whether we're facing a Humpty Dumpty problem. Do people know that, right? Can we put the things back together again? And was it a good egg to begin with? Philip, go ahead.
So great. It's great to see everybody here. I think, Bennett is a great friend who put this together. I think it's very timely. I think that I love community universalists because for reasons we'll talk about a little bit later, I can future, everybody says this, but I can tell you exactly why the future rests with all of you here in the universities and the students. And there's a lot of documented in my mind empirically that is in fact going to be true, particularly in this period of time. So I'm welcome everyone for being here, and I have a lot of hope, even though the world looks quite gloomy, depending on how you look at it. So I think multilateralism as we know it right now is dying. I don't disagree with anything that folks have said here. In fact, I agree with it wholeheartedly. I think there are percentages about where it can go and how it can go. I just want to give a perspective of, I don't think we can bring it back, nor do I think we want to bring it back. I think that the world has changed so profoundly in a way this time. We are transitioning from a completely new, what I call world operating system 1.0 to world operating system 2.0. We can talk about that later and what that looks like. But I think the conditions right now from the old world-based system, multilateralism, world-based system, is we can't bring it back. And I think because of three basic things: the population growth puts so much stress, and that is growing what I call, if you look at population growth was relatively flat, is now growing exponentially. It'll probably top out at 2050, right? So we've got about 3 or 4 billion more people coming into this world that have not been born yet. A lot of stress on the system. Secondly, economics. For whatever reason, we continue to grow. Economics for the longest period of time before the era of globalization was relatively flat, but now is growing exponentially too. I mean, just the market economy and market democracy has worked. And the third is the wild card in a sense is technology. And as you see this, the way institutions work that we have here, multilateralism, current government, is basically linear. It takes time by definition. But all these things that we're talking about, those three trends are putting incredible stress and are growing exponentially. So by definition, the amount of need versus what you can provide is getting bigger. And so the argument is that this system, as it exists right now, does not work and will not work and will eventually fall apart one way or the other. That's sort of, and I'm being somewhat provocative, but I just want to, I'm being, I'm doing this to make a point. So when I look at where we are right now, I can tell you what the symptoms are in terms of the condition that exists in terms of a new world that is being created, okay? These are the symptoms that we see. Multilateralism, I thought about, you talk about rules, right? In a multilateral system, more or less, they all apply to everybody. There's a idea of predictability. We're going into a condition-based world right now. And what I mean is it all depends, okay? You don't know, it depends on circumstances. Enforcement, generally predictable. There are institutions. It depends now on power and context. Now, arguably, realpolitik versus internationalism, that has always existed. But the general idea was that we created multilateralism because, power does not make right. Might does not make right. That was the idea. Legitimacy that we talk about comes from norms, right? Established norms that are predictable. All that is negotiated now. And primary actors that I think we're talking about are nation states through institutions. And for me, the actors are whoever has leverage, okay? And it can be either multinational corporations, individuals, you can name it. The world is changing very quickly. Now, it is not binary. It's not like we're rules-based and now we're not. There are layers here, okay? So let me very quickly, and then I'll stop here. Let's talk about finance and economics. For right now, finance and economics is still largely rules-based, right? There's predictability, it's so important. We see that right now. This is what the fight is in Washington is about, right? With the Fed. The interesting thing is that rules-based used to be in the military security side, which is my world, right? New START treaty, defense treaties, the UN, all these things on the security side were always rules-based. And now we see that fraying. We see it fraying in Ukraine, we see it fraying in Iran, we see it fraying in Venezuela, we see it fraying in many different, in Gaza as examples. It all depends, right? When we could rely on certain kinds of commitments, you can't do that anymore. It all depends. As you see the dispute between Japan and the United States, Japan and Korea, give me more money. It's transactional. The third layer is what I call the technology AI side. It is becoming much more conditional. You negotiate between everybody. Who's got better leverage? Who's the multinational? Who's the non-state actors that are going on? And then the final one that is a Wild West is cyber. There are no rules in cyber at all. So what's going to happen here over the next 10 years or so is you're going to see, unless we can figure out what we're talking about here as Vogel is, there's going to be a lot of dynamic between this transition from rules-based to more conditional-based, and that is going to create a lot of uncertainty and a lot of angst, I think, in many ways. So that's my take on where we are right now.
Great. I wanted to actually push a little bit more on this question, which is just so far, not that many proper names of countries have come up. And if we are to think about what will emerge from what has been a major rupture to the current order, who do you envision taking the lead on the alternative that we might see in, say, 5 years? Steve, you mentioned the US, you're a Japan expert, other names that we could throw out there. I mean, Canada, Carney gave a big speech. Europe has talked a little bit about this. There are other countries that could emerge as leaders. China is obviously the one to rival the US. But if we think about multilateralism functioning without American convening power, without American financial heft, and maybe even, I mean, the dollar has been very dominant for a very long time, right? So how do we think about who is likely to emerge? Like, what is this? What if you're put in your magic seen into the future goggles on and tell us what you see? Who's emerging as another leader, or are we just talking about Hobbesian state of nature? Everyone's lives become nastier, more brutish, and shorter.
Must be that. No,
that's a famous political.
I will. So let me run through some of those names. If we start with Europe and Japan, I don't think they can replace the United States, but they could do a lot. So the question comes down to, I think, will and capacity. I was, I guess, initially quite disappointed in responses to Trump's kind of new tariff regime, because I think a little bit maybe like domestic resistance to Trump, that an individual country other than the United States can't really take on Trump. But if they worked together, I think they could have done a lot more. I was surprised to the extent to which they were relatively eager to kind of make deals with Trump and make concessions. And I asked a trade negotiator about this. I said, why aren't you working together, to fight this crazy person? And their answer was, we have tried that. We did try to do that, but each potential partner, for its own domestic political reasons, was not willing to do that, right? And the interesting part, at least of that answer to me, was that they were arguing that it was a different answer for every single country, right? so everybody had their own reasons, but nobody was really willing to stick out and like try to form a kind of a coalition of resistance. Having said that, there are signs of I think more resistance, more creative thinking about building coalitions. Just starting with Japan, I think of like Japan's options for how to deal with Trump. You take them from a spectrum from like passive to proactive. I go pander, placate, deflect. Deflect means take what they're telling you and kind of try to shape it in a slightly different direction. Resist and replace. So replace, I think, is off the table. I don't think that's a viable option. I would love it if the countries like Europe and Japan would move a little bit further in that direction of maybe more resistance and more deflect and a little less pandering. But if we start with the Japanese case, I think the Japanese leaders learned the wrong lesson from Trump 1, because their strategy was, for Trump 1 was very clear. It was pander and placate, with the emphasis on the pander part. Like if you praise this person enough, then they'll calm down, and you can kind of like just hold your breath and wait until it's over. And I think that because they saw that as a successful strategy, that's kind of been their go-to with Trump too. And what I would like to say to them is, no, this is not the same. The situation has changed, and that strategy is not going to work for you, and it's not going to work for the world. Having said that, I think I mentioned, you do see signs of greater autonomy. I mean, most strikingly, if we fast forward to recent events, Europe taking a very autonomous position on the Iran conflict. So that's a possibility, and that it opens up. You also see creative alliances. You have Canada's Prime Minister Carney saying, what we really need is an alliance of middle powers. And you're seeing just kind of a plethora of like bilateral arrangements and talks and initiatives where I think countries other than the United States are trying to see what their options are. Maybe not in terms of, like I was saying, creating a new international trade regime, but things that would buffer the influence of the US and create alternative pathways to, kind of more modest collaboration. Okay, which brings us to the other elephant in the room, which would be China, right? So can China replace the US? And I would say not anytime soon. I'm not saying that there aren't some major steps being taken, right? So just for example, the China is filling gaps. Like if US is withdrawing from UNESCO, China's representation in UNESCO and its power, and that's happening in other UN-related institutions. So that's happening. Obviously, you have the Belt and Road Initiative. So you have China showing signs of wanting to, but it's not the United States and it's not the Soviet Union. It's not. There's not a broader, I don't see, kind of desire for ideological hegemony. It's a more defensive and less expansionist posture than that of the Soviet Union, like I was saying. And they've got their own problems. in terms of the Chinese economy, in terms of the potential for domestic strife is real. So in that sense, I think that, China obviously economically is going to grow relative to the United States. It's increasingly a technological leader, so I don't mean to downplay that at all. But I am saying that it will not be a replacement for the United States in terms of global leadership. Also, just in terms of like the trust, and there isn't currently a pro-Chinese coalition out there ready to move. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. And I also think that sometimes we overestimate the threat of China being a kind of an evil empire that is going to undermine global stability.
Did you want to react to anything? Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
Sure, just to build on what you were saying, we are, as I see it, in such a unusual moment. We're in a moment globally of fracture and fragmentation, where a new system, if we think about fragmentation versus system as kind of opposites, the new system is not in place. We're not at all sure what it's going to be. It's going to take a long time to emerge. We do see in kind of ad hoc ways on certain sets of issues. We definitely have seen in the past year coalitions of like-minded countries, or sometimes not like-minded countries, but countries that want to partner together, building coalitions, pushing multilateral solutions on some issues. And this is positive from my perspective. But what we don't see, as Steve said, is we don't see a new hegemon that wants to come in with ideological dominance over the whole system. And even when the US did try to play that role, as we know, the US was never, and no country is, especially the US, was never consistent on every single issue across the international system. There were always issues and events where the US pushed to uphold international norms, and other cases where it pushed to ignore them. But generally speaking, I think the US saw itself as that global hegemonic ideological power that was trying to enforce and strengthen a system. So we're moving out of that system, and we're moving into this fractured situation. I don't see China stepping in to fill this role for the reasons that you described. I don't see European democracies stepping in to play this role as a leader of a system, again, on certain issues. And just one last thing I want to mention that I think is really interesting about this moment, and I wonder if the rest of you agree, is that unlike, say, after the end of World War II, when Britain's role as a global power kind of went into decline pretty quickly because of the economic shape that it ended up in after World War II, and because there quickly was a lot of pressure for it to end its role as an imperial power. So it really quickly lost status, power, and influence, and the US, of course, rose. One of the interesting things about this moment is that, at least as I see it, the US is still the most powerful country in the world. We remain the most powerful country in the world, but we're stepping back from playing the role that we've played. So there isn't a vacuum that is created by, say, the disappearance or the defeat of the previous leader of the system. The US is still there, and Trump, as we've seen in this term, he's not an isolationist. He is trying to shape, by force, by economic pressure, he's trying to shape every part of the world. He's very active, very forceful, very aggressive. So it's not a withdrawing of the US, but it's a changing of the role and a stepping back of leadership.
Yeah, I think maybe one thing that's really important to note right now, because I know we have kind of a mixed audience. I see experts in the room and people I know are undergrads in the room. So one of the reasons why the US was allowed to sort of rise as a global power in a reasonably unchallenged way. Of course, there's the Soviet Union, but then after that, was its restraint, right? It did not try to shape everything everywhere. And that's part of the difference in what we're seeing right now, and part of the potential reaction we're seeing from other powers. Philip, did you want to comment on this question in terms of what the next, like what a middle power governance structure might look like, or what you think, who is likely to emerge as an alternative, or should we move to the next?
No, I think that there's going to be a lot of muddling around for the next several years. I think that people, you know, they're talking, when we talk about finance, right? When we talk about the US dollar, I think the consensus is US dollar is going to remain, you know, central currency for quite some time, until it's not, right? And you know, you can never predict it. It's going to last, and then usually when you have systems like this, they last for a very long time, and their demise is very, very quick. That's just the one thing that you know with state systems. So, you know, the nation state. I mean, my view, quite frankly, and what I would like to try to do is, I think the nation states, the concept of nation state and its current role has limited time. I think that might be inconceivable to a lot of people, but I think it is for a variety of reasons. We can talk about why that might be in particular. And so my emphasis is, for the time being, you do what you can. And I think a lot of, you know, as we were talking about government, prevent really terrible things from happening. But I'm more focused on what is going to be replacing it. And I think there's a lot of fertile ground here at the universities and think tanks and other places where, what does that look like? And what is it? I mean, you think about, you know, the 20th century was a battle conceptually for an operating system. You know, modern operating system 1.0 was fascism versus communism versus market democracy economy, right? What is the battle right now? You know, my view on this, I think it's been really hard, is that a lot of people, I think the Chinese and I think others have backed into it, quite frankly. I don't think Xi Jinping or anyone in the Chinese have had this idea of world domination. What they do want is a different set of systems that apply to different people. They don't like the US system that was created. They want to change it. And so they have advanced a narrative that they backed into, because they are providing perceptually, the perceptions they're providing for their people very, very well, and we are not, right? And so therefore they have taken the lead in presenting an alternative, which people can label authoritarian capitalism, whatever you want to call it, as a third way that provides for their people. And the idea here in the United States and others within democracy and in Asia, that the democratic neoliberal system does not work anymore. That is, and so what's happening is, here at the national level and the international level, there's no alternative dialogue. There's no alternative to what the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, which is based a more authoritarian based, let's move quickly, we can do these things. And so that's what's not being articulated. This is what we should be doing right now here in the United States. If the United States, and let's say whether it's Democrats or new centrists, or Republicans, come up with a new narrative for what the new world is supposed to look like, then it will come from the United States as a leader, because I do think it has a lot of social capital that doesn't exist, that still remains. Okay, that is my hope. Okay, and I think there's a possibility, and that's why I'm working and doing the things that I am doing. So those are the stakes here, right? A lot of people, you know, there are a lot of old-time Democrats, because I'm a Democrat, want to go back to the 1990s, or the 2000s. They want to go back to the Obama and Clinton period. That's not going to work. And if we do that, no one is going to go to that vision. We have to create something brand new. And that's why I'm saying is that all of you here are the ones who are going to create it, not me. I could tell you what I think does work or doesn't work, but that's the challenge for all of you, is to figure out something new. And the analog is, you know, back in the 1800s, 17th, 18th century, no one thought there was an alternative to monarchs. Well, nation states came up, right? There's always something new. The one thing we know is change is going to happen. We just don't know what it's going to be.
That's actually a great bridge to our next question that we have planned, which is turning to democracy and human rights. And Amy is going to start on, in response to this one. But Amy, we wanted to have you talk a little bit about how many of the institutions and agreements that the U.S. has exited or has undermined in the last not very long, such as the Human Rights Council, the World Health Organization, and the Paris Agreement, were imperfect, but really helped shape a lot of global norms in terms of individual rights, and also norms in terms of trying to get to agreement on issues related to climate change and health. One argument that I've heard, and I think I've actually made this argument myself in various forums, is that However disruptive this current moment feels and how panic inducing it can be for those of us who think international order is a good thing and global governance is a good thing. The argument is that this moment of confusion and uncertainty creates an opening to reform institutions that were created at the end of World War II and really needed reform, right? That were desperate for reform, in fact, and that had a lot of problems with legitimacy and compliance associated with the fact that they needed reform. Perhaps institutions that could become more effective, could become more equitable, perhaps give more voice to countries that have become more powerful since the end of World War II, perhaps give more power to countries that have become independent since the end of World War II. And so do you see any, you started with a pessimistic note, but do you see any cause for this moment of reform as being a thing that we should look forward to, especially in your area of expertise, the field of democracy and human rights? Is this just, what we're going to see is just authoritarian global governance, which is going to look very different?
Okay, let me try to search for a kernel of optimism here. I agree with you, Susan, that this moment presents a huge opportunity for strengthening global norms that are under assault relating to rights and freedoms and democratic values, for strengthening through reform, through improvement, through revitalization, existing multilateral institutions and creating new ones. So the possibility is there. When I look back, however, at the past year, and there's a lot happening in the world, so I probably have missed some positive examples, but I don't see as many significant initiatives in that direction as I was hoping to see. We do see like-minded democracies banding together in certain cases to push back within the UN system, for example, against things that the Trump administration is trying to do. For example, at the recent UN Convention on the Status of Women, which was just finished, what month are we in? We're in April. Last month, in March, there was an effort by the Trump administration to introduce language that was considered by many stakeholders as very regressive on gender and on reproductive rights. And there was pretty much of a unanimous pushback among the other delegates, the other participants, to defeat that. And the Trump administration was really left isolated and alone with its effort. So there are things like that happening. There's some other examples too. But I also see things that are very concerning. I don't see a very robust response to strengthen the UN Human Rights Council now that the US is out of it. And the US has been out of that council before. It's kind of gone in and out. But this time, arguably, it is more significant because it's coming as part of this assault that the Trump administration is making globally on these norms. I don't see a very robust or significant effort within the UNHRC. I also look at, I think one of the most natural groupings to kind of take this mantle and push it forward with the US stepping back in this, well, not just stepping back, the US is actively attacking these norms. It's not just pulling back and retreating, it's actively trying to undermine them. European countries are kind of the most obvious group that has power, economic weight, et cetera, to step in. And they themselves, as I'm sure many of you know, are very divided on issues of human rights and democracy. There are big debates and tensions going on within these countries domestically about the value of democracy, the importance of human rights. And there are also big debates among European countries. And I'll just mention one example of something that I thought was very interesting and concerning in this regard, and that has to do with the European Convention on Human Rights. This is something that a lot of Americans don't know about because we're not part of it, but it was possibly the most important human rights instruments that was created after World War II in Europe. And recently, a group of 27 European countries, so we're not talking about outlier of, Hungary under Orban or Turkey under Erdogan, Turkey is a member of this, want to change some of the language in this convention because they're arguing that it is too restrictive. The human rights protections in this convention are too restrictive on state sovereignty to deal with challenges related to migrants. So they're basically making the argument, again, this is 27 countries, that's quite a few, saying we need to be able to take action against irregular migration and against uncontrolled migration in our countries, and we need more latitude, not being restricted by these human rights norms to be able to do that. So to me, this is alarming, I think, in terms of these divisions really sharpening within the one group of countries that we might expect to be really coming and filling the void or pushing back against the United States. So I'm sorry to end on a pessimistic
No, that's
note,
okay.
but-
Do you either you want to react to that question in terms of future of democracy and human rights and really, I mean, this is something that we could all talk about, but like really what we want to focus on is the potential for reshaping things. So the question to Philip, I'm not going to let you go because the question I have for you next is very much on this, but
Yeah.
Steve, if you wanted to react to this a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I think if the US administration is hostile to progress in this area, and China is too, it's hard to see how we're going to make a lot of progress. But when I think about, human rights and democracy in the US and China, it takes me back to a certain day in my life. And this, I'm going to reveal my age here, but this was before China's accession to
27.
the WTO. WTO, when we were still talking about whether China should have most favored nation status. And I forget what the news of the day was, but for whatever reason, this was in the news then, that particular day. And I was subjected to 2 unsolicited lectures on this topic as an American. The first was from I was in Southern California at the time, the Turkish consul general, who said, there is no one in the world who can speak for the victims of China's human rights abuses except the United States government. And so we, the rest of the world, are counting on you playing that role. And so I was very moved because it was a very passionate speech. And I thought, okay, there's countries that actually see the United States in that way as kind of like this force, this potential force for good, and kind of the only show in town on this. So then same day, a Japanese journalist, and he says to me, why are you Americans always giving these lectures about human rights, especially to China, like that's going to help. It's going to be counterproductive, right? And so the only way you can hope that China will make improvements is through economic engagement. And you got to play the long game. And so I guess, many years later, I'm thinking one could argue that both of these strategies failed, right? That confrontation didn't seem to work too well, and engagement. I would hold out a little hope for engagement, because one could argue either that we didn't pursue it long enough, we weren't patient enough with China, or maybe another way to put it would be that the US didn't do enough at the right moment to actively engage China in international organizations, right? To bring them in when that was still a possibility, as opposed to a rivalry. And what I'm particularly thinking about is like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, where we could have said, like, let's work on this together, and the US decided, nah, we want to run the world by ourselves. Which you can understand that, but given the trajectory, maybe there was an opportunity to move on to a different path.
I could keep talking about these things for a long time, but I'm going to move on to what we think is next for the internationalists. And Philip, this is for you.
Yeah.
You have talked and written about how the world is on the cusp of needing to upgrade, and I believe this is a quote, its next operating system. Do you think that internationalists are currently forging a coherent vision? You kind of already hinted that you don't think this. For what comes next? Where you do see some ideas being explored and advocated, what are the key challenges to articulating them and getting some momentum behind some of these new ideas that we might think are good ones? And can any of the core aspirational elements of what we're going to broadly refer to as liberalism, so pluralism, democracy, respect for human rights, basically things that pertain to individual rights, can these things be maintained in what you're calling this next operating system.
I would hope so, right?
Well, I think we all do. People
Yeah.
really don't like to be tortured, for example.
Right.
It's not a popular.
So, it's interesting. I mean, this has been an ongoing dialogue because I had this thought, starting this maybe 10 years ago, this whole idea that there's something in the air that things are shifting fundamentally in terms of what our world works. And I believe like every 150 years, something like this happens. And I think that's part of the reason why on an individual level, we feel anxiety, right? The things that we normally refer to in terms of family, church, technology. I mean, I don't have my phone with me, but the fact that I have to change my phone every 2 years and have to relearn everything, or my operating system, my computer, that's stressful individually, right? When you go to the computer and you have to start using all these different things that you haven't done, you're younger, but can you imagine someone my age trying to deal with all of that? It's like hard, right? So that's on one level. Now, can you imagine on an international level, globally, all the things that are changing, the norms that we've seen, everyone's disoriented. I mean, when Trump came to power and when he became president, and I was at Plowshares Fund, which is very left-leaning in terms of their values, it was like a therapy session when I was talking with major donors. They were stressed about what the world was going. Like all of you are stressed about everything. Okay, that's because everything we know is changing, right? So for me, as I said, the first world operating system was this battle between communism, fascism, and neo-anarchist democracy. Well, now what's the next one here? Okay, I said I gave you a notion of what's happening now, this conditionality of that's how things are working. Now I've kind of defined, and so when I was talking with you, I was here last year, I was hoping people would come back and give me some ideas. What does this look like? Because I had no idea. I mean, I can ask the question, but I don't know. I was relying on you. So I've been talking with folks. So here's a refinement of my thinking, right?
Mhm.
World operating system, as I said, was rules-based, United States-based, institutional. 80 years, it's dying not because of Trump, but because he's a symptom. It's too slow, too rigid, too dependent on reluctant hegemony right now. Okay, so we have a choice, I think. All right, and this is what this conditionality is evolving. China may not be evolving in terms of how it wants to be the leader, but by example and the way it operates is sphere of influence. In my sphere, I can do what I want, leave me alone, right? Human rights, it was all rule-based. Everyone agreed to it. Everyone thought it was really important. They're saying, we don't have to worry about that anymore, right? This is where we're going here, right? So if I would just say, so what I've defined it as, and if you can think of a better word, I got to make it catchy somehow, right? I think there are choices now that we're making, and where China, Russia, some people who are very, very conservative, reactionary folks in the United States, they're going to what I would call, and we can say I worked as a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, is a closed source governance. I'm not using democracy because I want it to be a little more appealing broad lines. Closed source governance. And I say that's multipolar authoritarianism, transactional, bilateral, sovereignty as a shield, opaque, proprietary control. China, Russia, Trump, Orban, all these people are building towards that. That's their inclination, right? It's real politics, real power, might is right. They are building this right now. The alternative is what I think has to be an open choice for us. And this is what I called open source governance. That's what I'm calling it.
Instead of democracy?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Open source governance, because it's different, right? It's different not because of the semantics, it's different in approach. And it's transparent, but there's a lot of familiarity. It's transparent, it's collaborative, distributed. And the difference is it's not focused on governments in national level, it's cities. I think the cities are going to be the place, and states are going to be the place where all the action is happening. Ultimately, governance systems are going to be judged by do they provide. Most of the stuff that Washington does for us, we don't really see. Gas prices eventually, but it's like, do we have ability to, buy a house? Do we have a job to have ability to find a job? Those things, I think that at the state and local level is where we can figure out what that looks like. That will gain legitimacy and be replicated elsewhere. I really believe that. That's my theory of change here. Okay, so they're building a closed source system. We're building an open source system. And I think ultimately what rests, and this is really a great question for all of you, is what's really at stake here is I'm talking about a change in culture. I'm talking about how we look at each other. I'm talking about basically the social compact that we go from political science. What do humans owe each other when they give up certain rights? And I think that's at the heart of the debate that's going on. The people who are much more authoritarian say, some things, but not a lot. There's certain values here that we don't care about. But I think, what does it mean to be human? Do we trust each other or do we not trust each other? Do we rule by power or do we rule by collaboration? Now, I will argue with you. Great book that everyone should read, Change the Way I Look at the World in Certain Ways, the Wengrow, The Dawn of History. If you guys haven't read this, you got to read it. Okay, Dawn of History, amazing book. What they're saying is that this whole notion of the brutish nature of human beings and all that is only based on 1% of human history, right? From 16, 17, 18, 1400s on. That human beings' natures, actually, if you look at prehistory, which we've disregarded, but 95% of history, there's a lot of experimentation going on. Really some cool stuff that they've been able to do with new technology. So my view is that the idea, this is your virtue here, is that play and imagination is what creates things. And the only thing that I can think about that, this is maybe very rudimentary. I mean, our phones came from Star Trek, right? iWatch came from Dick Tracy. Those were never in anyone's dreams until that came, and then we put them into being. So you are all limited by your imagination of what this world can be, and it is not zero-sum necessarily. It is not necessarily lack of trust and people are going to do the worst things. I mean, this is the basic argument that people have had. My argument is there are a lot of examples in human history where societies did not operate that way. Why does it have to be this way? Okay, and this is the opportunity for you to figure out what that is. Now, short term, there's a reality, there's huge skepticism. That's the big thing. People are going to say, this is a bunch of hogwash, right? But, that's where we get in trouble, is a failure of imagination all the time. And I think that what we're lacking is not institutions, we're lacking connections and infrastructure to help people figure out what that is. And I think if we can build it locally and show that it can work, then it can be replicated elsewhere, right? You can do it here in your own place here, right? In Berkeley. We're trying to do that in San Francisco right now and show that it can work. And then we're going to allow other people to advocate. So that is where we have the choice of what I call closed source governance, open source governance. It's networked. And ultimately, it's going to be judged on, does it produce things that need to be produced? So that's sort of a big picture. Happy to talk about it. But then again, the values are, what did I write down? It's transparent, collaborative, and it's coordination, right? So anyway.
Thank you, Philip. I'm going to ask one more question to each of the panelists as a group. Same question, all panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if you have one in the back of your mind, I'm also going to put out there that since we have what appear to be a lot of students here, we'll privilege you all first. So we're excited you're here. Okay, so looking ahead, what keeps each of you up at night the most? Which multilateral institution or framework do you most worry will have collapsed or been hollowed out by the end of the decade? Do you envision a revival of a normative rules-based international community under American leadership? Is that what you're hoping for? Some of this has been addressed a little bit, but I want to put a finer point on it. And I guess another way to ask it is, which institutions do you want to invest in preserving? Yeah. Is there anything worth fighting for that we need to try to keep around? So does anyone want to go first? What keeps you up at night? I have a lot of nightmares, but I take a sleeping pill now. Anybody?
I could take a stab.
You go ahead.
I did write down a short list because there's so many.
Okay, what keeps you up at night? Make sure you
I was
talk to the back of the room too.
Nuclear war.
Yep.
Right? That's got to be number one. Second would be major power war.
Yep.
Third would be the erosion of a sovereignty norm. And so this is wars, not quite major power wars, but these are the ones we've seen, right? Iraq, Ukraine, Iran. Erosion of democracy.
Yep.
Domestically and in the world. Climate change, inequality, public health. So that if we take your question in terms of institutions, I think I'm going to cry the least about an erosion of the power of the WTO. I think I don't think we should get rid of it, but I think a more modest international trade regime would be just fine. That some of our problems are hyperglobalization was a force that behind some of the problems that we are seeing now. We do need, it doesn't have to be NATO, but we need some sort of security architecture. So NATO or NATO 2. And same with the UN. I mean, we need a security order, and we need an institution that will deal with global problems of poverty, inequality. So I guess maybe to try to wrap it up, I'll be a realist for a moment and an idealist for a second. I was a TA for Ken Waltz, so I have to mention balance of power and system structure. I think we're going to have an evolution of the global security structure. It's not going to be unipolar. It's not going to be bipolar. It's going to be some kind of multipolar. But we need one that is relatively stable. Then I think, on the realist side, I think we have to be pragmatic. So I don't think there's going to be a U.S.-led normative order. I don't think, I mean, the current U.S. government is not up for that. And it's hard to imagine a successor government being really a top priority. So I don't see that happening. So I think we're going to have to be more pragmatic. But there are ways to be kind of hopeful on the more pragmatic side. If we take the issue of climate, I mean, it's possible that just kind of the sheer necessity of dealing with that problem will open up possibilities of international collaboration that won't necessarily rely on the current institutional structure. So that's maybe both realistic and hopeful. Going back to the, who's going to defend the principles or the norms, and that's where I'm just going to sprinkle a tiny bit of idealism. I think we can't count on governments to do that anymore, right? So it's going to have to be civil society is going to have to be the voice for a better world. I'm not saying that U.S. and Chinese governments are going to say, "Oh, well, you said so, we'll do that." But I do think it's important, and I think it's necessary if we're going to have a world we want to live in.
Amy, do you want to go?
Sure.
And then Philip have the last word.
Yeah, it is very hard to just narrow it down to a few things to mention because there are so many things to be worried about right now. But I'll just mention two things that I'm particularly concerned about while we are in the middle of this shift, and they have to do with norms and they have to do with the United Nations. So one is, the UN Charter and its kind of, we could argue maybe central issue or central tenet that really is a prohibition on, aggressive use of military force, invading other countries through aggression, not through self-defense, and without the blessing or the approval of the UN Security Council. Now, we know that norm, which is incredibly important for sort of world peace, we know that it's been broken before. Indeed, the US, the most powerful country in the world, broke it many times, but perhaps prior to this current administration, most notoriously with the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, which was not authorized by the UN Security Council and could not legitimately be described as any kind of war of self-defense. So that was an illegitimate and an illegal war that the US, as the most powerful country in the world, and at that time a much stronger, wanting to be a much stronger leader of the rules-based order, committed. So, and of course, we've seen Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are many examples of this, but within just the first 2 months of this year, and I think speed and the acceleration of events does matter in world politics for shifts. We've seen the United States invade Venezuela and abduct its leader and invade Iran. Both of those were outside in violation of the UN Charter. The Bush administration, I hate to say at least, but the Bush administration did try to get UN Security Council approval for its invasion of Iraq. It didn't get it. It went anyway. Trump administration didn't even notify its closest treaty allies of its plans to attack Iran, let alone the UN. So I'm very worried about the UN Charter and that principle, because we can see what happens when more and more states start ignoring it because they see the most powerful country in the world doing it without so far much effective pushback. And then the kind of lid starts to come off, and we could see a lot more of this happening across the world. And then once we're in a huge global conflict or conflicts, China invading Taiwan, all kinds of things, all of these important questions that we have about how to build a future system kind of have to be put aside while we're in this conflict. The other thing I'll just say briefly that I'm very concerned about is the norms of human rights and democratic values that are embodied in the UN Declaration for Human Rights. That has been under attack and been eroded for a long time. But I think that sort of attack and erosion of those norms is accelerating and taking place with more intensity in the past few years.
Mhm.
I don't know what can replace it because the UN itself is under siege by the Trump administration. But those two norms, prohibition on, sort of illegitimate use of force and the sort of global universal norms of individual rights and freedoms, those are both things that I really worry about as quickly eroding.
Yeah, I agree. What keeps you up at night?
Yeah, okay, agree with that. I mean, all these are, so let me just put a slightly different spin and different perspective on it. I guess the really easy thing to say that characterize all of this is, and I talked about this all the time in the context of North Korea and the Korean Peninsula miscalculation. That applies to all the specific things here that we're talking about is miscalculation. Nobody wants to get into a war on purpose. No one wants to do any of that. But stuff happens, right? They're unknown unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld famously said. But I think there's different context here now. Okay, when we talk about sort of international security, I mean, when we talk about order and the world as it works, usually we, all of us divide the world up into 4 areas. We divide up into economics, culture, security, and politics. Right? That's kind of the whole realm of the human experience. The economics and cultural aspects of that are inherently conservative institutions or conservative in the way they go about things. And what I mean by that is we have known, for example, we've had the ability to telecommute for 10 years. We could have done that a long, long time ago. It never happened. No one wants to change. But when we did COVID, think about COVID, guys, right? I mean, we kind of gloss over that. COVID, when it happened, we went from going to work and being online in the space of a month and a half. I mean, that is unbelievable how fast we were able to do that, right? Now, I can say, cultural institutions, I mean, religion is a perfect example, doesn't want to change, right? So what I mean by that, even though things are rapidly happening, there's an inherent break on those 2 areas of human existence. The problem is that the area of security that I've been involved in and in politics, it is exactly the opposite. All right. So what you're seeing in the military side and the security side, aided by AI technology, all of that, that's the common factor, is if I don't do it, somebody else is going to. So I'm going to go as fast as I can. And there is stuff going on here on every realm that is going to blow your mind. And we're seeing that now with drones, the whole idea of nanotechnology, of what it can do and how it can do it. And people are always thinking about, a lot of smart people trying to figure out how to dodge the other person and make life as miserable as possible. Human creativity is pretty amazing, right? So there's no brakes on this. And then when you even have in Silicon Valley, certain people saying, if it can be done, we should do it. I mean, that's like one of the craziest things I've ever heard in my life when I fell out my chair when I heard somebody say that, right? I mean, that's a lack of wisdom, right? But you hear a lot of people saying it. Trust us, technologists, we know what's going on. All right. Now, the other thing is, and you see that happening, but on the political side, we already see what's going on here. If I don't do it, someone else is going to. So I'm going to lie, I'm going to cheat, I'm going to say everything I want to, and everything is misinformation. Now, when you add, in the case of, and I'm showing my political stripes here to some degree, but that's fine. I believe that there are a number of people in government right now who are not top notch. they were chosen for the wrong reasons. So when you have that level of incompetence, or not the best and the brightest per se, but are really good at articulating and are quite handsome or good looking, that is a recipe for disaster in my mind, because you don't know what is what. And when things happen so quickly and are driven by the media cycle that we see, that is what I worry about.
I am going to open, on that note, I'm going to open it up for questions. And I'm going to call on you first if you look like an undergrad. Okay, so you first and then you and then, okay.
Yeah, so this question is mostly directed at Philip, and I like his use of the operating system, almost like a computer. You know,
Yeah.
you shut off the computer and it just blacks out in a new world. But well, I was thinking about while you were talking about your the different factors at play, right? The economics, the technology, all of that, right? The US since the 1900s has constituted at around or above 60% of world GDP, right? So it hasn't changed that much in terms of our economic power, right? And yet we're seeing anxiety over these factors at play, right? So what I want to ask is, how do we know what right now, because we're in a transition period, right? What do we know right now are symptoms rather than the actual underlying issues? What are we so concerned about right now that we're anxious about? Or what are the actual larger things, larger trends that we worry about?
Okay, so let me just say, the United States, right after World War I, after World War II, we were such a huge percentage of the world economy. Now we're a lot smaller, and I think it's a reflection of population, which sort of makes sense. I'm not sure, like, I'm trying to figure out, can you kind of elaborate what it is that you, I'm more than happy, I'm not sure the question you're asking, quite frankly.
Sure. So right now, the new world order we're looking at is more based on technology and things of soft power, right? So information, technology, the way you reorganize the world systems, right? Those we could see as more underlying trends, right? What are the things that are not so, like, let's say, long-term, what are more so symptoms?
So we have to find new systems. I mean, there are think tanks and universities working right now, alternatives, new kind of economic systems, right? There's a lot of money being put into that kind of thing, right? Which is really important. You don't have an alternative to what's going on, everyone's going to say, forget it. It's like nuclear war, but if you don't have a solution, people just get depressed. Okay, so there are a lot of different ideas that are floating around that exist. The problem is that system right now is not working fast enough, not respond fast enough, right? Everything was designed for a slower time. So it's not technology, that's just a fact. Things are happening so much more quickly. We've got to figure out a way for a system to be able to respond in a way that gives people an opportunity to make a living. Democracy fundamentally is based on being able to work and make a living. If you don't provide that, then you're in real bad shape, right? So I'm not sure, when I look at this new operating system here, that's what I'm trying to figure out, right? I gave you those characteristics, right? And everyone says democracy is the best system, right? Is it? With AI, with technology, is there a way to do things differently, but still provide protections for people? Or there's got to be some way for us to go about doing this. I don't have those answers. I'm not smart enough. I'm just asking the questions.
I think the quote about democracy, just to interject really quickly, is that it's the worst form of government, except for all of the others that have been tried. So
there's another one that can be tried. And my view is there a network kind of thing? And that's what I'm experimenting with in San Francisco and hopefully in the Bay Area. We're trying to figure out a way we can get committed people, and so much changing culture. Can we trust each other, right? Fundamentally, I think this is the debate.
You remind me a lot of Eleanor Ostrom, actually, in her work. So make that connection. I'm going to go to our next question, though. Here.
Yeah, very similarly. I think there's two parts of the question. Number one is probably more directed towards Mr. Yoon, but I want to talk about this idea about open source governance. And I think the first question is, do you see a desire for that open source governance within the US, maybe in places like New York on the local level, where we see rhetoric coming about more local forms of governance and more local forms of kind of like city level, state level nationality. I
Mhm.
think California is a really great example of state level nationality, but you see Mamdani being elected on a very New York centric kind of rhetoric.
Mhm.
You can probably see the same thing in the Bay Area with Shoika, who's running locally, right? And I think, so my first question is, do you see a desire? Is that kind of what you're viewing in the open source about a more local level culture shift? And then the second question is, when we move to a more local level culture, does that open up the international sphere for as much bad as good? Because without a more overarching theory, that leaves people to do just as much local level bad as we do local level good.
I think that
Mhm.
you tell me, are you yearning for something different? Are you happy with the way the world is right now? Are you happy with what your opportunities are? All right. Okay. So, in addition, so here's the other thing to think about, and maybe that's the way I'll answer the question. There are three things when you have to have cultural change. The first is alternative, right? So this is what we're talking about, alternative to whatever. The second thing is you have to have an infrastructure for it to happen, whatever that is. It's a political machine, it's going to be phones, it can be all. The third, and I think this is where they're starting to shift more dollars into philanthropic dollars, which is the world that I've been working on, is narrative, right? In the old world, I mean, World 1.0, the whole public affairs aspect of what happened in government is you figured out a policy and then you rolled it out and you spun it. That doesn't work anymore in the world of social media. The idea is that now narrative and story has to be weaved at the beginning of a policymaking process, not at the end. Okay, otherwise it's not going to go anywhere, right? And you think about it, until the last maybe 150 years, 200 years, there's no such thing as facts and arguing with people, all that. It was done by stories and narrative. So to get people to do what you want to do, what I want to do is create the narrative for the new world. What do you want in this new world? What do you want it to look like, right? What are things that are important to you? This is where you're going to come up with the narrative because I'm too old to come up with it, right? So that's the challenge here, right? And that goes to the second question that you had, is because I believe that nothing's going to happen top down. Everything's too crazy up there, right? We have to be self-reliant. That's one thing, self-reliance. No one's going to come help us. Washington isn't, so we need to do it ourselves. And if we show everybody else what's going on with technology, people can say, hey, students in Berkeley are doing something really cool. Why can't we do the same thing? That's how things happen. Okay.
I'm going to gather 3 questions now, and then I'm going to give each panelist the last word, just because we are short on time. So one here, go. Oh gosh. Okay, maybe I'll gather 5 questions. You go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Paul. And I'm a history major student. I'm now doing my research on the 1917 global revolutionary era, and my research is mainly about the underground publications at that time from the student organizations. So I'm just wondering, like, you said something about that young people should do something, but at that time, the young people of the world did too many things. The countercultural movement, so many movements happened all over the world, but nothing changed. I think maybe worse. When I'm reading this publication by the student movement at that time, they are very passionate. They did believe that American hegemony was done because of Vietnam War, because of such things. But
it was just rising,
but things just nothing happened, nothing changed. Right. So I'm wondering, this moment now, we're really at the age of something, the old system, or maybe a new technical like AI or something raise the economic blooming, and then just like 1960s, nothing happens.
I'm going to hold on responding, and I'm going to collect some questions, and you guys can answer whatever you feel like. Go ahead.
That's okay.
Okay. Here, go ahead.
Just quickly, the question of are we happy or not, it's a very loaded question, because obviously people are gonna say, no, we're not. So at the end of your presentation, you talk about misinformation. Aren't we in the world misinformed about the negative elements of it? When there is a lot of things that are going positive, and I'm a journalist, and I'm always doing bad stories, but generally I try to think of something that creates more positive. Or last night in my class, I invited someone that does solution journalism about how we can shape the stories differently.
Mhm.
That's not the
Mhm.
question.
Next I have, you and then yeah, go, you two, and I don't know who was first, so just go.
Starting sad, we learn all the international relations changing and like what actors and matter. And I have a question for Professor Vogel. I really like your point about the role of civil society defending global norms. And I just want to ask, like, given that government still holds formal power, do you think how can civil society make its influence actually more effective, rather than like just
Mhm.
symbol?
And then behind you, yes.
Yeah, my question's also targeted mainly for Professor Vogel and also Ms. Hawthorne. My main question honestly stemmed from when you were talking about how UN agencies and other global institutions are weakened. That started with the US kind of backing out, but now other countries aren't really doing that much to kind of strengthen that.
They're doing a little, but not enough.
Right, not enough. So my question is, was the US ever really committed to unadulterated multilateralism? And like, we look at like Bretton Woods, the American dollar being the reserve currency of the world, like the Iraq War, like you mentioned as well, it really doesn't seem to track in the way that we, at least like historically talked about it, and the way that we've talked about it in classrooms and things like that. So is Trump just kind of an expression of where we've always kind of been headed, or is this something that's truly good?
I might have to take a bite on that one too. Okay, go ahead. Amy, do you want to give a closing, like each of you take like a minute and a half, please?
Sure, I'll just try to respond to 3 questions, or what I understood from 3 questions. The first is about kind of, is it even worth it for young people to try to change the world? That's what I heard you say. Maybe you weren't that pessimistic, but I actually think that it's a really challenging time to get into the field of world affairs and foreign policy and international issues, but it's also an amazing time because the system is being questioned and a new system is being built. And it's hard to overstate. For my generation, when I came out of college and I was starting my career, the Cold War had just ended, and the US was the hegemonic power, the liberal international order was dominant, and these things really weren't questioned by many Americans. They were questioned by other countries. Now there's so many things up for grabs. It's such an amazing opportunity that won't come along once the new system is built for real change. And I think the main piece of advice I would offer is that, at least here in the United States, people have to be very entrepreneurial when entering these careers, because the traditional paths like joining the US Foreign Service or working at the United Nations or the World Bank or any international or multilateral institution, the possibilities are fewer. It's real. Change is real. There are fewer jobs, but there's so many kinds of initiatives that can be pursued through NGOs, through new networks, through new initiatives. So I see it as a much more exciting time, frankly, than when I was starting out in this field. In terms of, are we too pessimistic? Well, I've spent my career working on the Middle East, so I'm always pessimistic, and what happens in that region sadly always proves me right. So maybe if I broaden my aperture, I can see more reason for optimism, but I think what's happening in that region, and it's a symptom of so many things that we've talked about today, the degradation of norms, all of this stuff. And the third question, was the US really ever committed? Not committed wholly and without exception to a multilateral order. Of course not. The US, as a powerful country, has always carved out exceptions. But I believe that on balance, there were more times when the US pushed for and defended that order than undermined it. It did both, but the default position on many cases, things that might seem like small issues, but really matter in certain countries, the US, when it didn't have major interests at stake, it would stand up and defend those norms. And so now we're seeing that the US isn't doing that when security interests are at stake, and even when no interests are at stake, the US just isn't interested. So I think, yes, on balance, the US was, we'll miss it when it's gone, I'll say. We'll see the difference.
Yeah, I think also that like one sentence about that is that having standards for democracy and human rights kept the US from doing a lot of other stuff that was much worse. So it's not that it had to actually do those things, but when it doesn't pretend that it's promoting democracy and human rights, it does many, many, many worse things in the world. Go ahead.
So I wanted to pick up on the threads about young people and about civil society. And I think we have to think about like political innovation, right? I mean, because just because politics has worked a certain way doesn't mean it will in the future. And I'm particularly thinking about technology, which we think about as such a bad thing in lots of ways. But the technology enables a couple of things that weren't possible before. One is to connect people around the globe in a very intimate way that you can't do without it. And the other is to publish information, to give power to new voices. Obviously, the technology enables misinformation, but it can also enable good information. So I've started a project where we're trying to do this with colleagues in Japan. We call it the GAN Global Citizen Forum. For all of you students, we're in our quiet phase now, but check back with me in a year and I will sign you up for this movement. But we already have partners in South Korea, China, Japan, obviously, and most recently South Africa. And in fact, at 10 p.m. on Saturday, we're going to all be meeting because that's the only time that works for everybody. It's going to be
This is the problem associated with global civil
but
society
we're going to do it.
time zones.
So I think it's possible.
Philip,
Okay.
Last word?
Yes, I agree that I think the difference between international and national is basically disappeared. That's why Commonwealth Club and World Affairs merged. The issues are the flip side of the same coin. I completely agree that it's going to be up to you to be very entrepreneurial, to figure out what you want to do, and the opportunities are really just within your imagination. There's so much out there that you can do, particularly with AI. So that's what I would encourage you is don't get pigeonholed. I can do stuff doing locally and it will affect things going internationally if you do it the right way. I don't think there's any question. So that's one. Let me talk to you about the stories. Don't get me wrong, and let me just say, I think that the polarization and the facts and all these negative things are status quo interests because it sells stories. I think that this country is not as polarized as all the media is making it to be. That is a fundamental premise of what I am talking about here. And I think that if you talk about gun control, you talk about human, everyone kind of agrees on this. The media and the best interest gets a lot of money for promoting all of this. So that is why, I mean, in certain ways, I'm a little too didactic. I say facts don't matter. They don't matter as they used to at the beginning of any kind of policymaking process, not anymore. They matter later. What matters more than anything else is telling the narrative of what you want to do. People will react emotionally to something if you talk to them about what it is that you want to accomplish. Not that you're stupid, not that you're ignorant, you don't understand the facts. We believe in the same things. And that's what narrative and journalism can do, rather than focusing on the negative. You know, really quickly, Luke Combs. Okay, I love country music from Ohio. Okay. Remember, and then he did the song Fast Car. Tracy Chapman did, right?
I saw them perform it together at the
Yeah,
Grammys.
exactly. I was trying to get them together to do something a while ago, but just think about this. New York Wall Street Journal wrote an article talking about, what do they talk about? The difference of Luke Combs co-opting Tracy Chapman's song, and it was this co-option thing, and it was this race thing. And in fact, it's a great story because the narrative that Tracy Chapman was talking about of the inner city was exactly what was happening in my part of the country, in Ohio, and the country. And they chose to ignore that, right? So that's a great example of it sells stories, and narrative is so important now. Okay.
As one of my colleagues said, if it's good enough for Tracy Chapman, it's good enough for me. Thank you, everyone.
That family for dinner.
Thank you, guys.
I got it right.
Here, let's,
Great to meet you.
here, let's,
No,
press the mic, huh?
I've got to start reading about other stuff.
Thank you, I'll see you soon again, I hope.
Very nice to meet you. Yeah.